Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier again with another episode of the In Focus podcast. And we have a return guest, which is always good because, well, you'd have to be old enough to know who Paul Harvey was. And if you know who Paul Harvey is, he had something that he called Page 2.
Nice.
So this is a second visit for our guest, and I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll just take it from there.
Hi, Ron. Phillip Mellen. Good to be back.
Good to have you back.
Thanks.
Wanted to focus on some of the things that we didn't, have a chance to touch upon last week because, as you know, everybody's a book, not just a page, a paragraph. And some people are volumes and volumes, but you can't get them to give you a paragraph. I mean, some interviews, have you ever had an interview, for example, on your Ahtcast, that's Ahtcast, on your Ahtcast, that wonderful person, quite talented, and it was like trying to pull the fangs out of oh, that's not a good analogy. Pull the fangs out of a snake. Trying to move a stone.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it was really a struggle, but I tend to expect that I'm going to get an hour at least.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And yeah, that's kind of the standard, so to speak.
Yeah.
Even if you edit down that kind of thing, or but I had one interview. It was 13 minutes long, and it was great, but I almost took it as a failure. Like I should have somehow, got more out of this, but like to get them speaking more, but it took me by surprise throughout. And then I kind of lightened up about it. I thought this isn't a traditional format. Obviously it's a podcast, but I sort of adjusted my expectations to think this is a project. So that was cool. And I think I mentioned last time I had spoke to an artist for 4 hours, and the concept of a two-parter didn't really strike me until after that. But I, of course, edited it down to 1 hour. And so it varies. And I don't know. I guess I've lightened up, as I said, about duration.
Yeah. Well, truth be told, I'm a Virgo, so that means I'm, I guess, born with OCD to begin with. So everything has to be compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And structured.
Yeah.
I had some concepts of what it was I wanted to do when I started to do this, and then I went back to my old default, which is just throw it against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
Let the guest move the needle. And it's funny, I've been chasing after, I think the hardest part of this job is getting people to come on a show.
Okay.
Time schedules is number one.
Yeah.
Number two is, what do you want to talk to me for? I'm nobody special. I've got nothing to say. Then there are those, well, what are we going to talk about? Are you going to give me the answers, the questions ahead of time? It's like,
yeah.
How about you?
It's different. Yeah. I mean, I have questions that I feel that if I was being interviewed, I would want in advance,
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of send them, it's like 3 or 4, and I usually have 11 to 13 questions. I kind of have like a set that I go for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I handle that. And, don't get me wrong. I mean, I like to be somewhat to guide it too, but it just depends on who you're talking to, I think. As far as whether they like to plan ahead, or I'm a planner too. So I just sent an artist like 4 days and 4 time gaps, or slots for them to pick from.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think, is that too much? Like, is that not their style? They're going to pick it like the day before. And mostly that's for me, so that, because I like to absorb the work a lot, and like really dive into it. And even if I'm not actively looking at their work, it doesn't leave my brain, so,
Mm-hmm.
and I may take a few hours of considering their work or meditating on their work and only come up with one question, but it's worth it because I feel like that makes sense for them,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that translates well, but it's kind of.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, there's several things being podcasters that I've discovered. One of them is there are people who are not really familiar with podcasting or listening to podcasts. They've never listened to one before.
Yeah.
So they feel quite awkward as to how do I access this, so on and so forth. And then again, there are people who believe that this is a set agenda. I'm trying to get something out of them or whatever. And no, it's just a conversation. And I've had conversations with people I've known for a very, very long time that I still discover something new. And I've had conversations with people that I've only known casually. And we find a common ground, and I discover things about them that, are fantastic. And then, of course, there are the stone cold, never saw you before in my life kind of interviews. But
Yeah.
I've always been curious as to who you are because, so-and-so told me to contact you, or I saw a piece of your work and it was like, damn, I got to talk to this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the only purpose that we have, Jeff and I, is perpetuity, that we're building little pyramids here that someday in the future, 10, 20, 30, 50 years up the line, somebody's going to run across a Phillip Mellen piece, not knowing who you are. And God knows what Google is going to be like back, at that point in time. And they're going to Google your name, and bang, there's going to be the 2 podcasts that you did with us. And they're going to get to hear you. And I think that's really, really kind of important, because I'm preparing responses to for an article that somebody's writing on me.
Oh, cool.
And it's kind of weird to have those kinds of questions. They're very well stated questions.
Yeah.
And they really do kind of dig down into the depths of your soul sometimes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Is this going to be a text interview or a feature?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be a newspaper interview. And one of the questions was about my creative beginnings or my creative past.
Yeah.
Both in the same. And it wasn't until I'd never realized, for example, creativity comes from my mom. She was a singer. Creativity, I've always related a story about her uncle who we lived with and dragged me to every museum, gallery, and everything in New York. I mean, my childhood memories are with my arm being pulled up, holding onto his hand, and the smell of cigar smoke. And I had these weird flashbacks watching Night at the Museum, because we'd go there quite often, right? But it wasn't until I was thinking about my dad and how he wanted to be an architect, but he was severely dyslexic. In fact, I'm planning a series of paintings on him, on his life, which is just something for another day. But a friend of mine who's an Emmy award-winning videographer saw some of my dad's work and said, holy crap, your dad was pulling moves that hadn't been invented yet for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
So, you take all those things and it's an interesting journey,
Yeah. It's being on a different side of the questions or the other side of the questions.
Yeah. So
yeah.
With the Ahtcasts, and your own personal work, and now your personal work, we want to talk about your poetry, especially.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I think I've been bitten by the bug in a way.
Okay.
My new work has a visual narrative, but there also has to be a written narrative that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Which is completely contradictory to anything that I ever thought about as an abstract painter. Because when I was an abstract painter, well, I still am, but I'm going to this other side now.
Yeah.
I would
The
say to
dark
people, if I
side.
have to explain it, then
Yeah.
I didn't do a good job painting it.
Okay. Well,
You know?
I think there might be two sides to that. Like if someone asks you questions, that's a good thing. But I feel like if you have to explain it without someone asking you questions, for me anyway, that you've kind of done it, and
Hmm.
if that makes sense, like you've done it in the painting, and if you get questions, that's the frosting or the bonus,
Hmm.
but it's like weird to, like, you're in school and you put your work on the wall for your senior show or something, and then you have to stand by it, and it's like there's a weird tension,
Defend your work.
you just kind of walk around the show and pretend you're not the artist and see what they have to say as they walk by, and kind of bait them a little bit,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My ex-wife used to do that, which is one of the neat things that she used to do. She used to go in. She didn't like to walk into the gallery with me. She
Yeah.
liked to come in afterwards or go in first, but we couldn't go in together.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's up with that? And then I discovered her secret. If no one knew who she was, they would be very open about my work.
Yeah.
She'd say, so what do you think about this? Right. And they would tell her exactly. It happened once too with a student who really disliked me because I pushed him too hard.
Okay.
And he had no idea who he was talking to.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your poetry. How does it relate to your painting? Which one holds the other up? Or are they hand in hand? I mean, it's the what you're doing is very ancient. The Greeks used to pretty much do the same thing. They didn't really see a difference between poetry and painting.
I always think of them as being separate, only because, I mean, I guess they both have subject matter, but one is about my thoughts. Say the poetry is about my thoughts and kind of lacing them together, and it's about situations and relationships, and yet I think the painting is a little more abstract, but it's about those same things, like relationships of color, whether it's line balance, those kinds of like formal issues. But I just find that there's also some, I think, underlying insecurities in my poetry, and maybe some universal sort of truths or something, or some kind of like some things that I'm digesting. And just in the last week, I feel like I've been adding a little bit more of that into my painting.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I'm saying this now and it's going to take off in a different direction, when I paint later, but
yeah.
But I like to think that I've been trying to kind of merge them for a while, and I can't fight it. Like I can't force it. But I think if spending enough time and making enough work, whether it's the poetry or the painting, you kind of whittle away at who you are and what you want to do, and I just have a lot more work to figure that out, like and bring them together. But it's going to happen a little more naturally than I think I can ever like force upon it,
Mm-hmm.
I
mean,
I
Cy
want
Twombly
that,
did it, right?
I guess, yeah. I know. I really don't know. um, I guess. I think if someone tends to write, they're gonna do that in their work, in their visual work. People that are poets and they paint, and maybe they don't write, but they read a lot, or they're history buffs and listen to or read artist biographies that may have written. Words are going to get in there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know, it's weird. Like that's the hope that some questions come through from a viewer or reader that might help you learn about your own work. And if not, at least to see if something's coming across that you weren't aware of, or that there's a connection that you weren't aware of that you don't see or I don't see all the time because I'm so in it. That's why time is important, and actively painting is important, and actively not painting is important.
Let me ask you a question. When you're actively not painting, there's actually two sides to that coin. There's the actively not painting, which means actively not thinking of painting, actively not there. But on the other side of it, there is, and I've heard this from a lot of artists, I thought it was just like a weird thing that I had, when there were periods I couldn't paint, not because I had nothing to say or, had a block or whatever, but because I had no time, the situation wasn't correct, whatever. I painted in my head. And, I did that when I was quite disturbed by the fact that I was in advertising and marketing. And by the time I got home, my brain was fried. I had nothing left, but I would look at things and I would paint them. And I heard several people say, without me volunteering that they painted in their heads. Do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, whether it's in my head or, lately I have a better phone so I can take better pictures of my paintings. But either between that and in my head, like, I don't think I really ever leave it. There's sort of an automatic thing that happens. I said actively not painting is not material to surface, but I don't know. I just think there has to be a lot of sitting and just doing something else that might not, I love my porch for that, go out there and, and whether it's I'm listening to music or not listening to music, music's big, but yeah, I mean, you'll find solutions, or I should say that I find solutions sometimes to a painting that I worked on a week ago, and I can't really explain how that happens. I'm sure there's explanations for it out there, but it just it's a nice thing to have happen because you're in it, and you may not know it all the time, if that makes sense.
No, it does, because you triggered off, and this is something I remember going back as far as undergraduate school, where again, it wasn't the block, it was hard to explain. Motivation, I don't know, several factors, but or feeling disconnected. Yeah. So being a Virgo, I would start to clean the senior or junior or senior studio. I start sweeping, I'd start cleaning out the sink and whatever. And more often than not, in the middle of it, bang.
Yeah.
It was like I got sucked back to my easel, and I don't know, brain vomit, blah, it just let it all out, and then looked at it and went, holy crap. So are we, I'm intrigued by consciousness or lack of consciousness or consciousness, subconsciousness. Yeah. And I guess maybe that's where the spiritual comes in.
Could be. I think I like to think about doing the work, and for some reason I thought of that. I'm not sure the origin. I probably did at one point, but didn't write it down, so it's gone. Maybe someone can help me where this came from. But the carry water, chop wood, and sometimes painting equates to that. But sometimes if you're doing that otherwise, like you said, sweeping the floor, your brain switches off in a certain way that you get some kind of memory that sparks that's been meaningful or an experience, and then the experience could go directly back to your actual painting that you're making, and then like you mentioned, there it goes. It comes out, and I love those solutions too. I don't think that could point to the non-active thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I like deliberate. I'm not planning. I'm not. That's can be where it comes from too, for me anyway. But I've heard a lot of this stuff elsewhere, and it's sort of like guides or suggestions that point to where it happens in a way that you're not trying to make it happen. Like, no, again, there's that word again for me, the force it to happen,
Forcing, yeah, the forcing, exactly, and that forcing causes a lot of issues. This feeling of connectedness with the interviewees,
Yeah.
That you've had on your podcast, and also with you personally. Can you give us some descriptions of those forms of connectedness, or even when they're vague?
Well, and within an interview, or even
Yes, yeah, even in casual conversation, interview, whatever, yeah.
Well, I mean, it feeds a lot, and I don't. You have to have that. I use have loosely. I don't necessarily mean you like this is like you got to do this, but it's just it helps to have a life outside of art or painting or whatever your medium happens to be to feed that, because that's where some of the ideas come from. It could be what the person says in conversation, or it could just be that you're not in your studio and you're feeling life and you're experiencing life, which I could certainly do a lot more of that.
Yeah.
Kind of do a lot of thinking on my own and spend a lot of time on my own. But yeah, it just, you got to get the brain clicking. I think it helps to get it clicking on experience and a variety of such to help that along.
Now, do you live in your head? And there's a couple of parts to that question.
Okay.
Normally, do you live in your head? That's part one.
Yes.
Okay. Why? Why do you think?
Well, I think I'm the majority of the time I'm actually mistaken to think that that's where you solve your problems, and that's just a personal thing. Maybe that comes from my poetry, like where that's not always where it happens, and you can probably hear that a lot in my poetry, but I hope it's not too, that there's some a little more a story that's not just my own, hopefully, and so yeah, the mathematics of figuring things out isn't always like so linear.
Well, there was a Facebook post that you did, and you know which one I'm referring to.
I think so.
And you had people really, really scared. I mean, you had people wanting to call the hotline.
Did I?
Yeah, I was like, okay, is this one of his poems? Or is he just writing this prose that's poetic?
Yeah.
Because he's in that mood.
I shouldn't downplay it, because it started off with a very direct linear, there's that word again, which I like, but right from a deep place, and then it morphed to something that it became more of a story about many different experiences, not just that moment, but it became about the past and hope for that to change and evolve, so yeah, I mean, I've done that before, and I think a lot of people know that it's okay, I mean, a lot of people checked in, but I don't think I alarmed anybody too bad. That's not my goal.
No, there was one in particular, maybe two, to a slightly less degree, who seemed very, very concerned. Like they want to go run over your house and bang on your door, not knock on your door, bang on your door.
Yeah.
In times of crisis, or what's the word? Times when you feel insecure for whatever reason, do you tend to crawl into your own head?
Well, the head can be a good place or a bad place to be, and like it can really fog what you see, and sometimes it's hard to know if that's just a thought or if it's like the way you feel, or both, or some kind of meshing of the two. But it just, like, some people create from that, and I occasionally do. So like I said, the beginning of that post was not very poetic. It might have been alarming to a degree. And then, but as it went down, I processed as I typed it out, you know, and then it became a poem. So I guess there were chapters within that, you know, and even um like different moments within the same, you know, piece, so to speak,
Right.
if I can call it that. I mean, it, you know, it morphed into something, but and it echoes stuff that I've written before, and I'm sure I'll write again, so to speak.
Do you practice or whatever concept, hearing yourself think, which is speaking or
Yeah,
writing? I mean, you know.
I like to do it. I don't know. I mean, I think I cringe afterwards, but I want to edit it.
Yeah.
if that's where you're going, if that's what you mean.
It's not stream of consciousness. It's you know, and I believe this. You know, we can call it spiritual because we need a label to apply to it. It could be just a form of process. But for example, when I lived in Portugal, what was one of the greatest aspects for me was I would be able to do my walk and thinks, is what I call them.
Yeah.
It was a massive beach, the biggest beach in Europe, and they had these boardwalks. And what was great about having the boardwalks was that all you had to do was just keep your eye, you know, peripherally on the edge of the boardwalk. And if you fell off, you fell into the sand. I mean, it was like a 4-inch drop.
Yeah.
But you knew that, you know, you could hear your feet on the wood, and you just walk.
Yeah.
And when you got to the end of it, which was a mile, 2 miles away, you just turned around and came back.
Yeah.
And, you know, people call that mindless. But if you equate mindless with selflessness,
Yeah.
when, you know, do you enter the state where you don't even know what you're thinking, and then when you try to relate something to someone else, it's not a speech, it's not a lecture, it's not even a sharing, it's you're hearing yourself think.
Yeah.
I think teaching was great like that, because you could hear yourself think.
Yeah.
And if you could hear yourself think, then that meant you were not only teaching,
Yeah.
but you were also learning more than you were teaching. I don't know. It's all this philosophical stuff.
I think it's important to get out of your head and to have conversations with, you know, other people than yourself. You know, because I mean, that's where some of that happens. I don't really have any teaching experience, so it's just that conversation. If it's a little more like balanced, you know, between the two individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like an interview setting, which I tend to do, which I love too, and that helps. If, you know, some of the questions that bounce back at me or mirrored back to me. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I could, like, going back to the crisis thing. I think it's an important thing to talk about, and, you know, if I probably need a little bit more or a variety of coping skills, but I tend to stick with like the painting and the poetry and the recording and stuff, you know. So I don't know. I mean, that night I did a lot of thinking, and that happened because of probably a few days of thinking and just being and listening. Like, this makes me think of that song, so I put that song on repeat for like 5 times, and it made me think of my friend from, you know, from high school, and then an experience I had with him, or like where's our friendship now, and it really came away from a relationship to a few of them, like, and hopefully kind of like a common thread between more than one experience with someone, or even different people, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense, because, you know, right now, you know, in the work that I'm doing, which is a total about face from my abstract work, there's a photograph that someone took of my dad when he was living in Canada, up on our family farm. And I looked at it. It was kind of interesting, sort of like Canadian Gothic. You know, he's got a pitchfork and he's in this hayfield.
Yeah.
It was somebody made a calendar of
Okay.
this. They attached it to a calendar. The calendar year was 1950. So he was hanged. So that had to be July of 49
Okay.
when he was 19. And he's just standing there in the field. And I don't know if he was goofing for the photographer, but it could have been that the photographer, and I don't know, just caught him gazing, just like those moments where you're like, they're not there. You're just like lost. These people call it lost in your thoughts. But when you ask somebody, what were you thinking? They're like, I don't know.
Yeah, it just
You're like
it
zoned out.
snapped it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they snapped the photograph of him, and the what's intrigued me about it is I think it's a photograph of him at a very pivotal point in his life, because he had lived up there for 10 years. He was an American citizen, born here in New Bedford. And one of the relatives had gone up there. It must have been sometime around the time that this photograph was taken, and told him, hey, you better get your butt back over the border really quick and register for the draft, or else when you come over the border, you're going to be arrested. And he was like, what? Because his intent was never to come back over. And I don't think he ever thought like, well, I have, go over to go visit relatives. I mean, he had no intention of coming back to live. He was happy up there.
Yeah.
So I captured him in that particular thing. And now that, you talk about connections, very similar to connections.
Like, well, like a common thread between
Common
experiences and people.
threads.
Is that
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's like, the thread is not the issue. It's the thing that thread is connected to, because it's never just a straight thread like Ariadne, from the Minotaur, where it just goes through the whole labyrinth.
Yeah.
But it's like dots. It's like connecting the dots. And like I always used to tell my students, you have to find the dots.
Yeah.
And then once you find the dots, you got to understand where do they fit in the scheme of things, and you really won't understand until you now start to connect them.
Yeah, it can be complex, but I think it can be also automatic when you shut off like in a certain way. Like I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. I mean, flamenco dancers supposedly. I mean, you hear. I mean, you either love flamenco or you think it's just drunken Spanish people dancing on tables. Because if you don't understand it whatsoever, but they enter this state, which is a spiritual kind of a state called duende.
Okay.
Where they're not there.
Yeah.
They're conscious of what's going on around them, but they really don't care because they're in that space. It's almost like Matryoshka dolls, like the Russian dolls, the nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Have you ever been like in a car accident or something like that, where it's very strange how time gets encapsulated? And a lot of people talk about everything went into slow motion.
I just thought that, yes.
And people have mentioned it wasn't me there. It was me looking at me there.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing just really gets me sparking.
Oh, that's cool. That was a little journey there. That was nice.
Yeah. Have you encountered this with other artists? I mean, how many have you interviewed now? Not that I need like a finite number.
I mean, if I can mention that, in January, which I think you're going to release this in January, is going to be 10 years for Ahtcast. So
wow,
yeah,
10 years.
I know. What?
Yeah, how many? I mean, people love numbers. How many?
I got close to 200, and it's I know art podcasters that have more than that in the same span, but I'm irregular, and I have been irregular with the schedule, but so between the different audio interview projects that I have, I probably 200, somewhere around there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go there. Greatest moment.
Oh no.
Podcasting.
Greatest moment? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a moment where you laughed so hard you fell on the floor, or you started to choke up so badly you almost had to pause the interview because
I
you were
have
like that emotionally distraught or wrought,
maybe the not so greatest moments.
I mean,
Because
other
there's
than the
many
technical things,
there I can focus on that
Yeah.
because the others there's a lot of greatest moments, like there really is. And I say some stupid things, and I'm not going to tell you what they were, but but there's two moments that I just can't forget. I'm like, and I can't take it out because it just,
And you can't take it back either,
I
right?
can't take it out. And because it was like they were laughing underneath or something, so then
Yeah.
it becomes like this weird seam that just doesn't make sense, and it's not authentic, or it's not natural. So
Yeah. Yeah.
by
Well,
now they know I say stupid things. So
how about moments of connectivity where the both of you have jaw drops, like, oh my God, like you're so connected to a human being at a specific moment that it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a mind meld.
yeah, it happens a lot, and I think that it can happen with somebody that I have no idea. Like you mentioned earlier, this sort of like first meeting is the video call, and it's happened with people during that situation. And then it can happen with someone that you've known for a year, and then they're on the podcast, and it happens there, and you see a different side of the friendship because it's like recorded now, and then but that changes the questions you ask them. And sometimes you can know somebody for a year and the interview is just not the right setting, and so then it becomes that. And it's just, there's no way to like know how it's gonna roll off.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think the only constant is my questions that I have a set that I ask, and this, of course, I do add some fresh ones and ones that cater to them specifically in their work, but that might be the only backbone that there is, so to speak. And then the rest of it is it sprouts from that. So it's a lot of fun.
How do you feel about interjecting yourself or your experiences into the interviews? There's some people who don't like it. Well, the show's not about you, it's about your interviewee, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And you're trying to find common ground. I mean, you're really like grappling so you're trying to relate some experiences so that hopefully they'll go, oh yeah, same thing happened to me.
Yeah, no, that's healthy, and that's good for the show. And
yeah,
I find there's a couple of interviews where I don't really do a lot of that, and for whatever reason, I don't really know why, and I that's not what I hope for certain. Like, I mean, there is a part of it where I try to step back and ask the questions and say, respond or something if it's something they said. It's like, oh, like, tell me a little more about that. But I think I'm losing my train of thought a little bit here, but yeah, I don't know. I think ultimately it's the better ones are a little bit more conversational than. Oh, someone had said to me that, your interviews should be text interviews. And I thought, well, why? Because, basically because I just asked a question and they answer. And I'm like, no, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, maybe that one was, I was a little dry and I was a little less, I didn't talk as much as I could have, but but I don't know. I mean, I guess you're gonna have your critics.
Well, then you're gonna have guests too, where basically, not that this has happened, but you could go wash your car, go do grocery shopping, come back, and they're still going. God bless them. I mean, they're really zoned into themselves. I mean, that's what the interview is all about, and without interruption.
Editing.
But it really is. I've had people. The positive feedback on the show is like, oh, it's just a conversation. It's like, yeah, that's all it is. Because that brings me to my next thing that I've been, probably it's my marketing spidey sense is still there, but the cafes, we really need cafes more so now than we did pre-pandemic. I think we have discovered that, my friend refers to it as sociability. We really need, if you think about Paris and Germany, during the high points in Italy, during the high points of those movements, the cafe was always involved. If they weren't in the studio, they were in the cafe.
I think we've done well with the mediums that we have now on the platforms, or say technology that's available. I think it's happened for a while, and now we look at it differently. Like we've made the best of it more and more as time goes on with the pandemic and having to do the video calls. And I don't know, do people pick up the phone more and actually call one another like a little bit, here and there? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm more of a phone person than I am a texting person, because it takes me a while to type out. But I don't know. I just feel like we've had to make, as artists and trying to keep the community going, and art shows and what have you. I mean, sure, they're happening more now, brick and mortar, but which is nice. But I don't know. I think if you participate enough, then you forget that you're not in the room with somebody sometimes, because you can't be. So make the best of it, I guess you could say, right now. But yeah, do I miss that face-to-face coffee? Sure.
Yeah, because then there's a whole thing about the cafe society and the whole thing about how coffee came along. Coffee was like a legal drug. It was taught to, and it's actually an actual truth that it actually stimulates your intellect.
Yeah.
And that's where the greatest, the rationalist movement and all that other stuff started, because of the coffee houses.
Yeah.
There was an episode of The Simpsons I'll never forget, where they're eating their dinner or supper, if you from up here like we are, and they basically all have their TV trays and their food on the TV trays in front of the TV set, and they're just like shoveling the food in their mouth, and they're not interacting whatsoever. So there's no interaction, there is no connection, no connectivity, no sociability. And I think that the pandemic, in a way, has peeled the Band-Aid off of a lot of our social ills or shortcomings or whatever. And I'm wondering if, as with American culture, we'll really be, well, like 9/11, everybody had their flag flying and everybody had that feeling of connectivity and togetherness. And then slowly you started to see one less flag. And not that the flag represented anything but that unity, and then another less flag, and then nobody started flying the flag anymore. And people were right back to the same old crappy selves.
Well, I think it'd be an interesting transition and like new chapter. Hopefully, in some way, this goes away, and we keep some optimism and think that it's gonna happen. At some point, and I don't know. It'd be nice to see the sun again, to get all flowery.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and again, so that's another thing you bring up, other than what we're enduring now, other than what we're experiencing now. This, oddly enough, isn't as important as how we're going to deal with things when it's done. What lessons have we learned? What have been our takeaways? What alterations were we forced to make that we're saying that we say to ourselves afterwards, this is way better than doing it this way is way better than how we did it before.
Yeah.
And does that fall into your poetry? Does that fall into your work at all? Has your work been altered, affected?
Well, I think I spend more time by myself because of it. So maybe that's why I feel some of that, and I've been seeing some of that creep into my work. But I also hope that it can somehow make us less selfish or needy, or or so, like, to appreciate more, and I can't speak for everybody. I know I tend to do that, but I just mean like a collective, like, we're not, like, to just savor a little bit more when this goes away. And maybe some people did that beforehand and they do it now, but I think for me it's just to be a little more generous, I suppose, with and grateful, and of course it's hard to say that now because there is a lot of pressure on us. There's a pressure on relationships and, you know, families and, jobs and just everything, like it's really tough. And so just to like, just, I don't know. I think a lot of the hindsight's going to come and maybe it's going to be a gradual thing. But, for me, I don't always like think of it ahead of time. Like I'm not always awake until a new situation arises, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, no, the new term of being woke,
Yeah.
and it's funny because, you mentioned hindsight,
Yeah.
and it seems a little too obvious and a little too, uh, um, what's the word? It's not a pun. Well, it is a pun in a way, but hindsight is going to be 2020.
Yeah.
We were, I think, more isolated pre-pandemic than we are in the pandemic, and that the pandemic has forced us to be less isolated because we feel it's something else. Human nature is like a very wacko thing. I mean, what we think is something has nothing to do with what's going on. If thinking makes it so,
Yeah.
In your work, and I've asked this, of a lot of artists, have you felt a shift at all? Have you had moments of holy crap, or wow, or how could I not have seen that kind of
I
moments?
I was trying to create a series after my hero series, and
Mm-hmm.
I was going to deal with a certain subject that just, when everything came around, the pandemic and what have you, the beginnings of it, one word popped in my head, and it was no. Like,
Oh.
No.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah, and it just didn't seem important anymore what I was doing in the studio, so I just decided to take and change the format, and it was all out of like probably because I didn't feel like going to the art supply store, and you probably couldn't at that point. So I just had a bunch of 8x10s, 9x12s around, and I just worked small scale, and some of them were starting to look like looking out of windows, and but still abstracted and less, more still about color and what have you. But and then as time moved on, they're going back and turning into like faces again, and I'm not necessarily taking a back seat to that. It just seems to be kind of like subconscious, or just it's there's been a couple of like shifts, and I maybe shift is a little bit too abrupt for trying to describe what I'm doing, like a little bit.
Transitions, maybe.
Yeah, like a yeah, ebb and flow, I guess. And um I like where it's at now, and that's not going to stop. And I think painting's like that anyway, pandemic or no pandemic, it can ebb and flow. But um I don't know, it's weird. Like I just hope there's like a better relationship to myself with myself because of this, because you know it's it's helping me confront some things, and maybe it's my interactions with people too. But um it I like have to be home now, whereas before I kind of like chose to be home. Not the hours spent home and alone are probably the same. It's just that knowing something that is out the door that is dangerous can really play on you a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
Or so. So there's been a couple of changes, and I've been posting a lot of them, and you'll see on my Instagram that it went from this probably like after Heroes, it might have been like a lot of changes in the visual work, and I've even taken some paintings and reworked them since the pandemic that I started at the beginning, because I'm changing, my work's changing, my thoughts are changing on it. And um, I don't know, it's like, it's tough. I'm like, maybe there's a little bit of anger there, like, why do we have to be stuck? but, but, the creative process, I guess, can be like that, and we just have a different set of circumstances now that help it just add a new spice to it, I guess.
Um, were you an only child?
No.
Okay. Where did you fit in the
far from it.
in the canister set sort of thing?
I am the youngest.
Okay.
And I have a twin sister.
Okay.
And then I have 5 other sisters.
And 5 other sisters. So you're the only.
Well, there's technically 6 other sisters, but and then a half brother. Anyway, there's many of us.
Okay.
from different sources.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked is because, you know, sometimes that really does play upon in your head. You know, being an only child. And then, of course, you know, a couple of years ago, there was that positioning thing where if you were the youngest child, the middle child, the eldest child, you know.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that. I mean, you know, my brother Jim didn't live the same kind of life that my 2 stepsisters and I lived, because Dad was coming up in the world, and you know things were very limited. So you know our horizons were limited, and then by the time my brother came along, our brother came along, the horizons were much wider, and so he grew up in a world of privilege, so to speak, compared to us. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And the other thing too is, you know, introversion. I, believe it or not, am an introvert, but as my sister-in-law, I mean, she's, you know, we've done the Myers-Briggs test. I'm one of those emerging introverts. In other words, I'm a go along to get along kind of introvert, but I like it just fine.
Yeah.
The pandemic, it sounds like an awful thing to say, but I kind of liked it when we were locked down.
Okay.
It's not that I'm antisocial, but I don't know. I just had so much more time. I can't. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it affects us all differently, you know, depending upon our personality or lifestyle, you know.
Now, any of those factors, you know, introversion, extroversion, positional child. How do you feel that any of that has affected you in life as an artist specifically? Or have you just never really thought of it?
I don't know if it's apparent to me, you know, like I'm not, you know, I mentioned being awake.
Yeah.
I just kind of carry myself, and, you know, it's not, I'm not always aware of what effect I had or what I've learned because of it. I think in some way, maybe that's why I paint, you know, and I don't know how natural it is for me to do that, but it's an easy way or a different way to kind of like play, you know, whereas if you didn't have much in common with a sister or a friend when you were young, I didn't like, say if you didn't like a certain game that, you know, that your friends liked or something, you know, there's always a place to go to put your energy and ideas, you know. So, and, you know, of course, growing up, there was a lot of noise, you know, because in my household, I was the only boy and I was the youngest. So, you know.
Oh, so you were like the baby doll.
Curlers in my hair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They play dress up with you a lot. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Have there been periods in your life where you have drifted into something? You had absolutely no consciousness of what you wanted to do, what you were, where you wanted to go. You just drifted into it.
Yeah, art school. The second time around.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to hear your version because, you know, I'm not going to tell you my version because it's about you. But yeah, it actually happened 3 times in my life. You know, at the beginning of getting into art school, just when I was about to leave.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, a major life shift where it's like, oh well, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I like to call that surrender sometimes, versus just drifting.
Yeah, I mean, I think surrender is probably a good word for certain people's experiences with art school. I mean, I know I had to, and that was anxiety provoking, you know, because I just didn't know. I'm like, you know, this is selfish. Like, who cares? You know, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? Like, friends are like, oh, come out with us. And I'm like, I feel like I got to do that. like painting thing, because
I gotta be serious.
I'm kind of here. And like, you know,
Yeah.
Notes in my locker, like, come on, the painting will be there tomorrow. Like I don't know. Not that I always even painted. Like just the idea of painting, like I can't let that leave my head. So, but it's that's a constant. That's always been there.
I got to tell
I
you,
mean, the art thing.
I have felt your pain. Yeah. And it's like, oh, you're being too serious or blah, blah.
Yeah.
There's more to life than that. And it's like, but okay. So, the poetry,
Yeah.
as comparative to the painting, how did it come to be? And where is it now?
I've written for longer than I thought I have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because just in the Facebook memory, something popped up that I wrote 11 years ago, and I was like, I didn't even think I was writing then.
Yeah.
But in art school, I wrote more in my sketchbook than I did draw or sketch. Never really considered much of it poetry. I mean, just a lot of the living in the head coming out and coming onto a page. I would write some ideas like duality or various things. But where do I take that to an image? Like how do I do that?
Well, Edward Blake dealt with that, but he
Yeah.
was in this other world,
in his own sphere.
Yeah.
The first thing that popped in my head when you mentioned that, it was like, I got a new toy. I finally got a computer of my own. So that's like, I started recording and I started writing and then I'm like, oh, you can put this somewhere, so I put it on SoundCloud and then, then it became like, I'm sick of recording myself. So I'm going to start a podcast. Like there are many other factors to that, but just, it's something I've mentioned before, just the idea, like, like I want to get in a conversation, like this is getting old. So there you go. And you start talking to your friends, and the podcast started on a phone call that I was recording, and a lot of the questions came from her, that in the beginning, like, so, yeah, but they've always been side by side, at least maybe through me, and something I've tried to do. And like I said, I think I've always tried to make them come like meet in the middle, but I think my poetry definitely comes from me and my interactions with other people. And my painting, I think, comes more from, well, it's such a thing. Like it's such a extension of play. Like, I mean, you can say that you can write a poem that's colorful, but when you make a painting that's colorful, it's like, it's colorful. Like, if that makes sense,
No. It makes complete sense to me. I mean, there is, a lot of things that you said, triggered things in my head. And what's interesting about you as a painter-poet is that there was the test that they used to conduct in schools. I don't know if they still do it. It's called the Strong-Cooter vocational test. And back then, today they probably don't use it because it's too gender biased. But neuro-linguistic programming kind of is also gender biased too, because there's feminine, masculine, that kind of thing, auditory, kinesthetic things. But with Strong-Cooter was feminine. The feminine traits or the feminine leanings were more auditory, were more. There was mechanical and there was verbal. So the verbal was more feminine, and the mechanical was more male.
Okay.
And it's just like, if you think about DNA, I mean, but what's interesting about that is if you stop and think about the verbalization, which is the poetry, that's one part of your brain. And the visualization is another part of your brain. And that's really something really great to have, because there's some people don't have either one or are frustrated by utilizing one as a tool to achieve what they don't know they could have achieved better with the other. Does that make sense? You're a poet, but you don't know it.
Oh man, that's
an old one.
No, I'm just like, I don't know. I cringe at some of my poetry, and I'm not trying to like be hard on myself, but but it's just driven, like, and it's like, I think painting, I have a little bit more I'm a little bit more of aware of what, like, the beginnings of what can happen and what I can do. Whereas poetry is more of a surprise. Saying that, painting's a surprise too, but if there's like a difference, like, yeah, for some reason I just thought of like his poetry as being more three-dimensional for me than painting. Like, I can walk into it, whereas a painting, it advances a little bit more.
That's interesting.
If that makes sense.
What
Like,
do you
more
mean
of an
by
environment, because like the poetry.
Okay. So one is atmosphere and the other one is scenery.
Well, one painting is a record, and poetry is kind of something. It takes me somewhere different, and I feel like I'm going somewhere. Whereas painting for me is like, I don't know. I still think painting, it struggles to come to my eye like as something I've experienced, because it just kind of, it happens because of itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally understand. I totally understand. It was very difficult to turn the ship around, so to speak, from the abstract back to more of a realistic thing, especially with a realistic thing with a lot of emotional foundations to it. And there's also more baggage because, even though it's composition and it's color, it's line, form, shape, there's also narrative, different kind of a narrative. And then what that narrative is, what I'm doing is very, very emotional. And it took quite a bit out of me.
Yeah.
The first couple. And then I had to enter a show where I needed small works. And it was like, oh, I don't have the time. I'll just knock off 3 abstracts, right? Because, that was one of the things I could do. That was one of my skills, gifts, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And I did it. And it was like, I explained to my wife, I said, that's like bumping into an old heartthrob and going, oh my God, what did I ever see in you? I can't wait.
Which one?
The abstract. It was just like, I actually had achieved. I always said it was about, the attempt was to paint nothing, which is very difficult. And it was to do it cold-bloodedly. Well, I think of the 3 pieces that I ever did, honestly, were these 3 pieces for the show. It was like, just going through the motions. And I couldn't wait to go back into the emotional throes.
Oh yeah, well, that's where your head's at right now, right?
Yeah.
Now,
does the poetry ever lead to a painting and vice versa? Because we got to wrap this up. This is good. Yeah.
Does poetry ever lead to a painting, or vice versa?
Vice versa, yeah.
Ooh. To illustrate a poem for me would, well, I think I've done it maybe once, and not actively or like deliberately, but they can be complex, and maybe that's where they separate themselves, is because I can't like draw that well enough to do that, to illustrate space and emotional space. Like, I don't know how emotional my paintings have been. Maybe, hopefully if they need to get there, they get there, but it's definitely, that might be the dividing line. And, I think that it's through me, so there must have been some crossover, but there's one in particular which I called Imaginary Friend, but that was the first one. I sent you another one which I called Imaginary Friend 2.
Yeah.
So, but like, I'd have to paint landscapes, I think, if I translated my poems, and my paintings to go back would have to be to a poem would have to be a little bit more quirky and less structured, I guess. And structure is a tough word. Like, I don't mean that to be as rigid as it sounds, but a different set of like, I don't know.
framework. Let's call it a framework.
Yeah, like a set of something. I can't do it.
Well, it's I think we all have that. I mean, the people that scare me the most that are artists are the ones who know exactly what they're doing. And it's like, that's not possible. I mean, not from my experiences. It's not possible at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I always equate it to we're driven somehow. And I've heard people use antenna, channels, lightning rods, all kinds of analogies of that sort. And I remember, one of the ones that just popped out of my mouth at a gallery when somebody asked me the question, and I was going to like, I have no idea. And then it like fell out of my brain and into my mouth was, I think the character Jack on Close Encounters of a Third Kind. He has that experience in his truck on his way home with the UFO.
Yeah.
Kind of freaks him out, freak anybody out. And he, sitting there with Terry Garr, having dinner, and all of a sudden he starts playing with his mashed potatoes. He has no bloody idea what the hell, why he's doing this.
Yeah.
And he's obviously getting a lot of attention that isn't exactly positive, but he's on this path.
Yeah.
And, damn the torpedoes. He's going to evolve, emerge. Did you get that? And that's what I at the time, that's how I explained what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can go back to the subconscious or the automatic, or
yeah.
Like you have an experience and, you get rattled, sometimes, and it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. I mean, then you're playing with your mashed potatoes and it's like, I'm focusing, I can't talk right now. Like, but I am doing something.
I think you nailed it right there. I am doing something.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of powerful. Any parting words, any pearls of wisdom, we're going to do this again, We have to. This is good. This is good.
People are going to get sick of me.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate being on again. It's really awesome. And I don't know. I mean, there's no segue to this, I don't think, but a friend recently said to me, and something about knowing nothing about everything and everything about nothing. And maybe I don't know if that's wisdom or if it's more of a, just a way to think, and maybe not to take yourself too seriously or not to talk too much, but that's kind of, I don't know how to sum that up. Like,
I think it's called wisdom. It's called wisdom. I think it's wisdom in in overalls. I think it was one of the transcendentalists said that something to the effect that the best wisdom comes from a man dressed in overalls, because it's honest.
Yeah.
It's very, very honest. And now I'm having these flashbacks to the Scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz. But
if I only had
a brain. And then what was it? Dorothy said, well, some people with some people with a brain do an awful lot of talking or something like that. So, I don't know.
I forget, but I should know that because I watched that 1,000 times.
Yeah, exactly. Phillip, this has been great. Thank you. And it's seriously, and yes, part of this, and this is part of the evolution. Part of this is, the memorializing the legacy, the perpetuity of getting artists on the show so people could hear their ideas, hear their voices, their backgrounds, their fears, their joys, all that stuff. But it's also what it is, two people talking.
Yeah.
And what I liked about this particular segment, this episode, it wasn't forced, I don't believe. I didn't have to pull you out of your dark space or your shell, or because that happens.
Yeah.
And it was a good interchange of things, No,
I appreciate being on again, like I said. And I don't know. I felt a little, to be honest, it felt a little more personal, but I think that's good, especially given the first episode, which was a little bit more like an interview, So,
Yeah, exactly. All right. So everybody's going to be able to see your new work on your podcast post page. Post page is kind of redundant, but if you just say post, I don't know. So you're on your podcast post, and you'll also hear some of your poetry being spoken by you.
Oh, you're going to Like,
yeah, we're gonna put that up. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
That up. Yeah, all right. So with that in mind, thank you folks for joining us for another In Focus podcast with our guests, Phillip Mellen. And till the next time, be kind to each other, stay safe, and use your brains. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.